announced that we are making a formal referral to Attorney General Garland to commence a proper inquiry into whether charges should be brought and what charges should be brought. Let me start with 2 points. One, when I've made this argument before, the right-wing, fossil fuel-funded faux outrage machine has accused me of trying to criminalize dissent. Let's be absolutely clear. The DOJ tobacco lawsuit filed in 1999 was a civil proceeding, alleging that the tobacco industry engaged in a decades-long conspiracy to deceive the American public about the dangerous health effects of tobacco products. The end result was that the industry was ordered to stop future fraudulent statements and correct past fraudulent statements. No more than that. No arrests, no handcuffs, no jail, no prison. 2, citizens have every right to bring evidence of crimes to the attention of law enforcement. In fact, it's our job. If you walk by a storefront and see glass broken and goods missing from the window, you have every right to tell the cop at the corner about it. And if he refuses to go take a look himself, you have every right to ask why. Here, after a nearly 3-year investigation involving over 250,000 documents, Ranking Member Raskin and I released a joint staff report and over 4,500 documents containing evidence of the fossil fuel industry's continuing role in spreading climate disinformation and preventing action on climate change. Certainly, there is nothing improper about asking DOJ to take an honest look at what we found. And so that is why today, Ranking Member Raskin and I, within those guardrails, are sending this referral letter to DOJ to bring to the attention of the Attorney General the findings we have made public, which show a continuing pattern of the fossil fuel industry knowingly and deliberately misleading the public through an ongoing enterprise made up of multiple companies and organizations. The fraud has now morphed from its hoax and fake science days, but the goal is the same: deceive the public to stop real limits on fossil fuel production and increase profits. The obvious model for DOJ is its own successful case against Big Tobacco, as Sharon Eubanks, the former director of the DOJ tobacco litigation team that secured that historic verdict, testified in our hearing. She said, quote, "There exists solid evidentiary basis to move forward with a request to the Department of Justice to investigate the actions of the fossil fuel industry. Just as the Department of Justice investigated the tobacco industry and ultimately filed a civil racketeering complaint against the industry, given the similarities of the fraudulent acts and the government's successful case against tobacco, there is adequate foundation for building a case." We could not agree more. I will close by reading this, and I'll tell you afterwards what it was. Defendants knew there was a consensus in the scientific community that carbon emissions caused climate change and other harms. Despite that fact, they publicly insisted that there was a scientific controversy and disputed scientific findings linking carbon emissions and climate, knowing their assertions were false. Each and every one of these defendants repeatedly, consistently, vigorously, and falsely denied the existence of any adverse climate effects from carbon emissions. Moreover, they mounted a coordinated, well-financed, sophisticated public relations campaign to attack and distort the scientific evidence demonstrating the relationship between carbon emissions and climate change, claiming that the link between the two was still an, quote, open question, close quote. So what was that I just read? That was language directly from Judge Gladys Kessler's August 17, 2006 decision in the DOJ's case against the tobacco industry, with the substitution of carbon emissions and climate change in place of smoking and health effects. In a nutshell, the complaint writes itself. But one thing I can say as a prosecutor, you'll never make a case that you won't investigate. And that's why we're asking the DOJ to investigate. Congressman Raskin.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. We're calling on the Department of Justice today to investigate big oil for its decades-long disinformation campaign to mislead the American public about the climate effects of fossil fuels and to obstruct meaningful action on climate change. Internal documents obtained in our investigation demonstrate that fossil fuel companies do not dispute any longer that they have known for more than 60 years that burning fossil fuels causes climate change, and yet they've worked for decades to undermine public understanding of that fact and to deny and distort and misstate the underlying science. Under our separation of powers, the branches play different roles. So we are the lawmaking branch, and lawmaking includes significantly oversight. The Supreme Court has repeatedly said that the lawmaking branch cannot successfully legislate unless it gets the information it needs. And in the course of our oversight investigation, we have learned of a lot of troubling facts that need to be turned over to the executive branch of government. The executive branch is the branch which takes care that the laws are faithfully executed and implemented. And so a critical value that cuts across all three branches of government is accountability. If there's no accountability and there's no truth, then there's no progress. The deception and the deceit must end for us to seriously confront the magnitude of the climate crisis that we are in. I want to salute Senator Whitehouse for his fantastic leadership, and I hope that the truth and accountability that we've been striving after in our investigation will become a second chance for America and for the world to address the climate crisis.
Question or two on this topic? Yeah?
I have two real quick. First is, can you just talk a little bit more about what this referral entails from like a technical standpoint? I mean, like, is this just, as you said, Senator Whitehouse, kind of telling the cops about a crime? Or does it also involve you guys giving them more documents, you know, showing them evidence that maybe hasn't been made public? And then the second is if you could just talk a little bit more about what laws you think the companies and the trade groups might have violated.
In the letter, we invite the Department of Justice to look through the documents that we've released and our summary of them, the report that we put together. And we also let them know that there's a whole lot more documents for them to look to if they wish. So we're extending an open invitation to the materials that we have and urging them that they bring the resources of the executive branch to bear to get to the bottom of what appears to us to be fraudulent conduct through a complex enterprise run by the fossil fuel industry. As I indicated by quoting so often from Judge Gladys Kessler's decision, the most obvious model for this is the tobacco case. And that was brought as a civil RICO complaint, and it produced at the end of that decision an order essentially saying, "Thou shalt lie no more." And that order was a very significant inflection point in the public safety battle against big tobacco, because big tobacco's entire operation stood on a platform of lies. And when they had to stop lying and go back and correct their previous lies, it created the kind of moment that I think Congressman Raskin and I are hoping for, which is that we have a new day in terms of trying to solve the climate crisis before it overwhelms us. Yes?
Reached out to a bunch of these companies, and Chamber and API, they didn't respond in time, but I feel like I can anticipate their response likely being something along the lines of, you're kind of distracting from the shared goals of trying to address climate change. You should be focusing on policy and kind of making this transition easier, for us. Well, kind of, what's your response?
Well, if that is indeed their response, it's a dramatic improvement historically over their vehement denial of the climate science that they were perfectly aware of, and it would be progress over efforts to move to solar and wind and other renewable and sustainable energies. And I think we have seen some rhetorical progress there. But the whole point of having representative government is we don't put specific corporate subgroups of society in charge of the destiny of our whole country, much less of all of humanity. And so they're not in charge. Congress will be in charge, and the Department of Justice has to enforce the civil and the criminal law as they can interpret and understand it.
And to that specific point, when I said that the fraud had morphed from climate change is a hoax to the science is unsettled to the current status that we developed in our hearing is the pretense that they want to do something serious about climate, that they can be trusted to be honest partners in the climate conversation. And that, we were able to show, is simply not true. So in some respect, if that is what in fact you hear from them, know that that is actually part of the scheme we are challenging. Yeah.
It's a little bit technical, but obviously the science on natural gas has been debated, and it has evolved over the last, very, very quickly over the last few years. Talking to Senator Grassley just a few minutes ago, he said, no, natural gas is still better than coal. Part of your allegation here is that the companies knew that their methane leaks and that all of that adds up to natural gas.
Not being better than coal.
Can you just take on that idea? Is it in your mind still a debate at all about, because I know even the UN says if the methane leaks are contained, and natural gas does have a benefit.
The gravamen of a good fraud is that it focuses the sucker on a fact that is true but not relevant to the point. And in their fraud campaign, the fossil fuel industry has focused on the burner tip and ignored all the piping that goes back from that burner tip, all the drilling, all the leakage. If it's LNG, the pressurizing, the depressurizing, they've ignored the entire gas physical system that they run in order to just look at the burner tip. And that they knew better than. Yeah.
Can you, in making this referral, is that the end of Congress's role in
Not a bit.
investigating these things? Okay.
Not a bit.
How does it change what your strategy is now up here?
I think to the extent that the Department of Justice would be assisted by having additional evidence, we're perfectly happy to continue to look. These are questions that I'm going to continue to look at. I think that the congressman has said that should the voters be good enough to return the House to Democratic hands, and he's the chairman, he will continue to look at it. We will specifically pursue the answers to the subpoenas where the companies refused to provide complete documents or provided blank documents or refused to provide documents, and continue to dig towards the bottom of that. And it's perfectly appropriate for us to continue to do that during the pendency of an ongoing investigation, presuming that the DOJ commences one. Fair statement?
Fair statement.
Another legal one. Why do you think DOJ may succeed when New York's AG failed in 2019 in that case? I know they're a little bit different.
They're it's a different case.
Okay. I give you the softball.
Yeah, civil RICO, first of all, gives the government very broad investigative authority, even pre-complaint very broad investigative authority, specifically detailed to the Attorney General. Second, it is proven to just a preponderance of the evidence, not beyond a reasonable doubt the way criminal cases have to be. And I think the resources are there based on the tobacco model to show how you would put a case together to convince a judge that in fact there was all this dissembling and fraud.
But one other point is just we've assembled a lot of evidence here that didn't exist at that point.
Last one, thank you.
How much of where we are today is derived from Congress's failure to properly regulate this industry?
I think it's a whole separate investigation, and somebody, I hope, writes a very, very good book about it one day as to how the fossil fuel industry used particularly the new powers given to it by the Citizens United decision and the powerful influence of unlimited dark money to work through an entire enterprise of front group organizations and apply influence to Congress in a way that our founding fathers would readily have decided was corruption.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that answer is totally right. What we're trying to do now is to establish Congress's institutional and intellectual independence from the myths and lies that have been perpetrated by big oil over the many decades. So we're trying to take responsibility right now. And that means we need to establish accountability for what's happened. And at the same time, because we are in this global civilizational emergency, we need to be acting on the policy front on a daily basis, even while we try to establish the accountability that's been missing for so long.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.